Hi everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Sandro Boeri. I focus on behaviour in business and the impact of the levers that business leaders can pull to drive performance and culture. This is the week that was, your go-to series for fresh perspectives on how culture shapes the success of organisations. Today's episode is a little different. This is an end-of-year special, and instead of looking outward at the news, I want to look inward at something that has been one of the greatest professional privileges of my career, the topical requirement on organisational behaviour. So let me start with the most important point. It's been a genuine privilege to co-author the topical requirement on organisational behaviour on behalf of the Global Institute of Internal Auditors. This is just not another piece of guidance. In my view, it's one of the most consequential developments the profession has produced in decades. And I want to say a very sincere thank you to the global IIA for trusting us with a subject that many organisations and many professions have avoided because it is too complex, too political, and too uncomfortable. And in particular to Vika Scholten, to Andrew Cook, to Jill Austin, whose leadership, intellectual courage and patience made this work possible. This is not just theoretical work, it was a real collaboration, and this mattered. So why did we choose organisational behaviour? Because when you step back and look at major failures in business, in finance, in government and in society, the root cause is rarely the absence of a policy. It is behaviour. It is about people staying silent, people responding to pressure, people chasing incentives, people following signals from leaders. And yet for too long, internal audit has treated culture as too subjective or too soft to engage with seriously. The topical requirement changes that by giving internal audit three clear lenses through which to look at organisational behaviour: governance, risk management and controls. This is not about opinion, it is about structure. So let's start with governance. From a governance perspective, the topical requirement asks a simple but powerful question. Do boards and senior leaders understand how behaviour actually shapes outcomes, and are they governing it intentionally? It brings organisational behaviour into the boardroom conversation, not just as ethics theatre, but as a driver of strategy, resilience and long-term value. Let's now talk about risk management. From a risk perspective, the topical requirement recognises that behaviour is often the root cause of risk crystallisation. Pressure, incentives, fear, ambition, silence, these are not abstract concepts, they are risk factors. The topical requirement helps internal audit examine whether behavioural risks are understood, anticipated and managed, or simply accepted until something goes wrong. As internal auditors, we love controls, so let's talk about controls. There are 5 components. So let me walk through each component with a simple, practical illustration. Hiring in the topical requirement is not about competency alone. It's about values and character alignment. A straightforward example. An organisation that hires high performers but never actually tests how these people respond to pressure, to authority or to ethical tension is importing behavioural risk on day one. The topical requirement encourages internal audit to ask, do recruitment and onboarding processes check for values, for judgment and for character, or only rely on technical brilliance? Because behaviour under pressure is far more predictive than a CV or resume. In terms of tone setting is not just what leaders say, it's what people hear, interpret and act upon, and whether leaders actually notice the outcome. This is what I like to refer to as the tone feedback loop. A common example, leadership announces that speaking up is encouraged. Bad news is raised. The response is defensive or dismissive. The loop is complete and the real message has been received. The topical requirement enables audit to examine whether leaders communicate priorities clearly, observe how messages land, and adjust behaviour when reality doesn't match intent. So tone without feedback is noise. Tone with feedback becomes strong leadership. Training in the topical requirement is not about generic awareness sessions. It's about helping people make contextual connections. For example, do managers understand how pressure at quarter end can distort judgment? Do teams recognise how incentives interact with behaviour in real decision-making moments? The topical requirement encourages audit to look at whether training helps people connect behaviour to real-life scenarios, not abstract rules. In terms of incentives and disincentives, we ask a very simple question. What behaviour is actually rewarded formally and informally? An example, an organisation says it values integrity, collaboration and sustainability, but promotes those who hit numbers regardless of how they do it. The topical requirement gives internal audit permission to explore whether incentives reinforce stated values or quietly undermine them. And finally, we have performance management. This is whether about behaviour. Is it observed? Is it discussed? Is it developed over time? For example, are people only assessed on outcomes, or are they also assessed on how they treat others, handle pressure and escalate issues? The topical requirement encourages audit to look at whether performance management systems reinforce sustainable behaviour or normalise poor conduct in the name of results. Taken together, these dimensions and components allow internal audit to engage with organisational behaviour credibly and consistently, not as psychologists, not as moral arbiters, but as professionals applying governance, risk and control thinking to the human system. And that really matters, because if internal audit doesn't engage with behaviour, someone else will, often after the damage is done. So, as the year ends, I'm proud of what has been achieved, and I'm grateful to everyone who helped make it possible. But the topical requirement is not the end of the conversation. It's the start of a more mature, more honest way of understanding how organisations really work. So that's it for this week's episode of The Week That Was. If you found it useful, please visit my YouTube channel and don't forget to like, to subscribe and to share your thoughts below. And always remember, culture isn't what you say, it's what you do when no one else is watching. Thanks for watching and see you next time.